What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham G.S. Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're talking the latest episode of Broken Skull Sessions with Stone Cold Steve Austin, featuring the WWE Champion himself, Bobby Lashley, dropping on Sunday, August 15, 2021. We've been getting a lot of great Broken Skull Session shows over the last couple of months. We had the Godfather episode back in May. We had the Mick Foley episode in June. The Kevin Nash episode just about a month ago in July. And now Bobby Lashley going into SummerSlam as the WWE Champion for his match with Goldberg at the event this coming weekend. I've always been a big Bobby Lashley fan, so I was really looking forward to this, and it definitely delivered. And obviously, they talked a lot about the stuff that we already kind of knew about, with him leaving WWE and going to TNA and doing MMA, coming back to WWE. The cool thing about Bobby, though, is that he's been doing a lot of interviews lately, obviously, as the WWE Champion, but he really is more of a reserved, quiet, keep-to-himself type of person, so we really don't know that much about Bobby Lashley in that regard. So we got a lot of details on, again, his departure from WWE, or rather where he went after that. They don't talk about why he left WWE. It's been, I think, fairly well documented by this point that he left due to a racial issue with Michael P.S. Hayes, who had mentioned something, like made a racist comment towards him or whatever. I believe, as far as from what I can understand and what I've read in the past, that was part of the reason as to why he left, in addition to just other reasons as well. They never get into why he left WWE back in 2008. They just acknowledge his departure before. They talked more about TNA than they did anything regarding him leaving WWE as far as why he left the company. That was the only thing I would have wanted to know more about, but considering Hayes is still involved with the company, I can't say I'm too surprised. It's a touchy subject. It's a touchy subject, probably. So I can't say I'm overly shocked they didn't discuss that. But beyond that, they covered practically everything from, his amateur wrestling background, being in the Army, his upbringing, what brought him to WWE, his entire TNA run, and both of them, actually. He was in TNA twice, once for a very brief period in 2009 up until very early in 2010, and then from 2014 through 2018. So they got into all of that, his return to WWE, and everything else in between. I thought this was a really, really good episode. And I've known this for years now, but Bobby Lashley is an awesome fucking dude. Like, one of the nicest people in the entire company, and all of wrestling right now. And you would never know it based off his in-ring persona or his on-air character, and he's a badass on TV, but he's always been a really cool, genuinely great guy, and that really shined through in this interview. So if nothing else, you'll learn a lot about Bobby Lashley, the person in this interview, and how fucking cool he actually is, if you weren't already aware of that, which I would find hard to believe by this point. But anyway, they opened the podcast because I guess they were filming this 2 days removed from Money in the Bank. And Bobby talks about, loving the dynamic of the match that he had with Kofi Kingston on that show, successfully defending the WWE Championship on that show against the ultra-popular Kofi Kingston of the New Day. And he talks about how people, they may like Lashley, but they also really like Kofi, and they kind of have to boo Lashley because they like Kofi so much. And he also mentions that he started shaving his head in college. That's like one of Steve's go-to questions on these shows. Whenever he interviews someone bald, he always asks them when they started balding and shit, which is amazing. But he asks Bobby, like, when he last had hair, and I guess he said in college. So I've never seen Bobby Lashley with any sort of hair. Maybe he grew facial hair when he left WWE or when he was in TNA, and I just don't remember. But I don't think I've ever seen Bobby Lashley with hair or with facial hair or anything. And it is really kind of amazing. Like, you never really think about that. Just kind of a dumb thing. But anyway, we kind of learn a lot about Bobby Lashley, the person, early on in the interview. And Steve asks him, or rather just kind of outright says and talks to him about it, how Bobby Lashley likes to meditate and he likes motivational speaking. He likes to make the bed every morning, and that's kind of the way that he sets the tone for his day to get things off on a good note, which was really interesting. He talks a lot about that type of stuff and how optimistic of a person he is, so I thought that was really inspiring and really cool to hear. He talks about how he loves to read and learning new stuff. At the beginning of the pandemic, actually, when everything kind of shut down, of course, he was still in WWE, but it was around that time, on his off time when they weren't traveling and doing house shows and shit, he actually tried to get his real estate license during the pandemic. And it was also around that period they learned about the stock market, and his son learned about it too, so they kind of bond over that. No pun intended, which I thought was cool. He didn't know how the fans would react when they came back on the road, because they've been doing this thing now with him for a couple of months. They've been pushing him heavily throughout the entire pandemic for the most part. What if they didn't react, or if they didn't care about Bobby Lashley, which turned out not to be the case? And he's a big Kofi Kingston fan. He thinks he's amazing. And he was really happy to share the ring with him at Money in the Bank. And he believes that match of Money in the Bank, his complete decimation of the former WWE champion Kofi Kingston, really showed what Bobby Lashley is all about. He talks about his intensity, the origin of that intensity in the ring, and how doing flips obviously isn't his thing. He enjoys it, and it's great for other people. For him personally, to do it in the ring is not his thing. That's why he doesn't do that type of stuff. There's other people who can do it a lot better than he can, he says. And one of the things he's always really wanted to work on and doing a better job of is being more expressive in the ring. And part of that might come from being the son of a drill sergeant, Steve says. And he talks about growing up, he had a lot of good mentors in amateur wrestling and in college and, having, again, being the son of a drill sergeant, stuff like that, being kind of like the man of the house growing up when his dad wasn't there. He talked about doing more amateur stuff when he first started with WWE, like more amateur wrestling, background shoot wrestling when he first started in the company. He was doing that in house shows and stuff, and Taker was actually the one that went up to him and said, hey, don't do that, because when you crouch down and want to, spar and stuff like that and want to, lock up and shit, not lock up essentially, but kind of like crouch down, like the wrestling mentality type of thing, it makes you look smaller. And Bobby Lashley is a bigger guy, but when he crouches down and does that type of thing, it makes him look smaller. Taker said, don't do that. It'll make you look a lot smaller in the ring. So Bobby talks about how he never had an ego. He's never had an ego. He just loves to fight. He enjoyed being in the Army earlier on in his life, but he just didn't want to do it forever. So he took a sports management job right out of college. He got his degree. He was invited to nationals, the wrestling nationals in Vegas one time. Not only invited to go, but then subsequently called back and asked to partake in them. And he did really, really well. He won his first match, won his second match, and in the third round, he lost to the guy that ended up winning the whole thing and going on to do other cool things. So he knew that he had potential to be a great wrestler at that point, like an amateur wrestler. So the Army recruiter said, listen, if you come join or if you continue with us, whatever, we'll pay off your student loans and we'll allow you to wrestle and in the process get a job doing it. Not like doing WWE or whatever, but like being a wrestler as part of the Army or whatever. And he said, yeah, absolutely. His whole goal is to wrestle in the 2004 Olympics. And I think I've heard this story before. I don't know where I would have heard him tell this story. Maybe it was in TNA in like a video package, or I don't know what other interview I would have heard him tell this story. And maybe it was with Sam Roberts years ago. I don't remember. But he told a great story here about how he was actually involved in a bank robbery. He went to the bank one time to just go take money out or whatever. And he was waiting in line. And in the process, like 3 guys came in who he saw on the side, and they were wearing bandanas around their necks, and he didn't really put 2 and 2 together at that point, but it became clear pretty quickly when a shot rang out from behind him. It wasn't like he came close to hitting him, but I don't know if the guy just shot to make a noise or to actually hit someone, who knows. But the guy shot in the store, everyone ducks down, everyone goes crazy. He stiffens up, he gets really, really nervous, obviously, because he's involved in a frickin' bank robbery, So in the process, he goes down, he jumps down to the ground, and he just completely blows out his knee. It was the size of a softball when he got back up. So he had to have 2 surgeries on, and obviously he was fine in the bank robbery, and no one, I don't think, was hurt, and they just did their thing and left and whatever. But his knee was completely shot from hitting the ground so quickly and as hard as he did. He just completely flopped down to the ground when these people jumped in. Or rather broke into the bank. So he had to have 2 surgeries on it, and that essentially closed his window to compete in the Olympics, because it would have been cutting it too close, and it just wouldn't have worked out. So he had to give up that dream. He could have competed in 08, but that's another 4 years of dedication and training, and he just felt like he couldn't do it. At the training center that he was involved in at the time, that was where he met Kurt Angle, and Kurt Angle saw him and saw his size and thought that he had potential. So Angle gave his information to Gerald Briscoe. Famous WWE recruiter, Gerald Briscoe. Gerald Briscoe got a hold of Lashley, and the timing just wasn't right at that point. He was still involved with the Army and doing other stuff and whatever. And he said, listen, not right now, I'm definitely interested, but if you still have an opportunity available for me in like a year or so, let me know. And Gerald said, okay. So then after the bank robbery and he has surgery and whatever, they called him back. And he thought that would be it, and they would never bother, they would never reach out to him again. But they did. Gerald Briscoe wanted Lashley bad enough and to take a look at him bad enough that they called him back like shortly thereafter, but it was after the bank robbery. The first phone call was before that. So afterward, he was undergoing the second surgery, and his leg was in a brace and whatever. The guy could barely walk for a while. He hadn't been on his feet in a month and a half by the time that Gerald Briscoe called him. And he said, listen, we can't wait a year. We would love to get you down here as soon as possible. He's like, well, just give me some time and I'll be down there. So we kind of like kayfabed him for like a month so we can bide more time and at least be able to walk before he went to go meet with WWE, which that was hilarious. And he rehabbed his knee like crazy to go meet with WWE, Gerald Briscoe, and everyone else at OVW. So that's where his tryout was at OVW. He bonded with Dolph Ziggler there, who was also getting in to WWE at that point, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe Dolph was already there and he was just in OVW and they kind of bonded over the whole amateur wrestling thing. But he did well enough that Dr. Tom Pritchard offered him a contract. He actually started as Blaster Lashley. That was his fucking name in OVW. Cornette was the one that pitched it to him and he's like, oh, all right, fine. And he was just more determined to make it work more than anything. And he called it a learning experience. He didn't think about the whole nature of the business. He only really thought about doing the moves and that was it. He was kind of just basic training early on for him. And he's just a naturally quiet and shy person. As far as character stuff goes, that's why he never really came across too well early on in his career, because he's just not that guy in real life. So Paul Heyman actually met with him at a Denny's for like 4 hours when he first started in OVW. And Heyman told him flat out, dude, I can't write for you because I don't know who you are. So he got to know him a little bit. He wrote out like a 2-month storyline. At the time, Lashley was involved with a feud with Ken Doane, or what, I think his name is Ken Doane, otherwise known as Kenny Dykstra in OVW. And Cornette ended up, not Cornette, but Heyman, like I said, wrote out this 2-month storyline for Lashley. And WWE liked it so much, the main roster writers liked it so much because Heyman was on the writing team at that point, that they decided to call him up. So he worked with Simon Dean in his debut. I believe he made his in-ring debut at No Mercy in 05. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that's when it was. And Dean, he felt comfortable being in the ring with. He was very nervous going into his debut, obviously, his first match on TV. But Dean was also a trainer in OVW, so he kind of felt comfortable being in the ring with him. And Heyman gave him the best advice he'd ever gotten up to that point, and probably to this day. Heyman told him, don't take yourself seriously, but take your job seriously. And that has stuck with him ever since. They rewatched his United States Championship win when he took the belt from JBL on an episode of SmackDown in 06. He felt like a kid in a candy store during that run because he got to work with JBL, Finlay, Booker T, all these people he looked up to and had a lot of respect for. And he was a big mark for all of them, essentially. He praised Finlay in the fact that Finlay in their match when Finlay won the U.S. title from him, hit him with a shillelagh without actually hitting him. If you watch it back, it looks like he fucking knocked him out the shillelagh, but he never actually touched him, Bobby says. Bobby says he never actually made contact, which just is a testament to how much of a pro Finlay really is. When Steve brings up, and I love that they acknowledge this, Steve brings up December to Dismember, and Steve is probably a big Wikipedia guy. He reads their entire bio on Wikipedia and then goes back and watches the matches and the moments and reads up on shit, because he doesn't, I guarantee you Stone Cold Steve Austin was not sitting on his couch in December of 06 watching fucking December to Dismember. So they watch, or rather they talk about the pay-per-view and how much of a fucking disaster it was, and Bobby even cringes when Steve brings it up, and Lashley wasn't privy to the backstage drama going on at that point, but he even says that he was very clueless to the wrestling business. And Steve asks him, well, what happened with that show? And Lashley says, well, I think Punk was supposed to win. That's what I've since read, that Punk was supposed to win the Elimination Chamber main event. I won instead. I'm not going to sit there and say I'm not going to do it. I'm not going over. Who the fuck would do that, you know? It turned out an opportunity to make more money? Absolutely not. So he went over, and there was a lot of chaos backstage that day. Of course, it was that pay-per-view that caused Paul Heyman. It's kind of like the final nail in the coffin for him. And the last thing, it was the hump that broke the camel's back in the sense that he quit after that. Paul Heyman was gone from WWE like immediately afterward. But that was where Bobby Lashley, anyway, won the ECW championship. He talked about liking the Elimination Chamber concept, and that was where Steve was like, oh, you really are a positive person, aren't you? And Bobby's like, listen, I just like being optimistic, blah, blah, blah. And he says he just doesn't get mad, and he was just proud to be champ. He never really thought about, Steve brings up, did it ever really bother you, or did it ever really get to you that you were like the champion of this hardcore promotion that was once this hardcore promotion, and you're like this amateur, happy-go-lucky, white meat babyface type of guy? And Bobby said, no, I was just kind of proud to be champ, and that was it. He never really thought too much of it. They talk about the Battle of the Billionaires between Umaga and himself at WrestleMania 23, which Vince and Donald Trump were both involved, and they talk a lot about this for a while. And now Bobby thought there was no noise from the crowd, and how all the noise kind of went up because it was in that massive arena, and I think in Detroit, Michigan for WrestleMania 23. Massive arena. It had an open roof, I think, so that's why you couldn't really hear the crowd. He thought the crowd was completely quiet. He couldn't hear them at all. He also talked about working with Vince and how much of a pro he is, and how he really felt like in his short run with WWE at that point, he grew immensely as a performer for everything he had to go through. A lot of people thought he would beat John Cena, he says, for the WWE Championship at the Great American Bash. He was a year and a half in on TV, was already white hot. They rewatched the match here, and it was a pretty good match. And they talk about, Steve asks him, was it here where you got hurt? I thought he got hurt the next night on Raw against Mr. Kennedy, because he had a match the next night on Raw against Kennedy. I don't even know if it got over, but I thought he got hurt in that match, and that was it for him, and that was his final WWE match to date. I guess he actually got hurt in the Cena match, or maybe it was the next night, who fucking knows, but I thought it was in the Cena match. It was a labrum tear, and they basically told him you have three options. One, you take a couple months off and get it back to 100%. Two, take a couple weeks off and just rehab it. Or three, just keep going until it completely fucks you over or whatever, basically. And he's like, oh man, like I just don't want to have to take time off. I really want to keep going, because he was white hot at that point, and he just worked a pay-per-view main event with John Cena. I mean, if he didn't win the pay-per-view on that, if he didn't win the championship on that show, he probably would have won it at some point. They were that high on the guy in 2007. But again, he left WWE soon after. He left 6 months later. Don't talk about why, like I said. They just kind of completely gloss over that, which, given the reasons why he did leave, I'm not too surprised about that. Or maybe they talked about it and they cut it. I don't know. But anyway, they talk about TNA. That was where he went after he left WWE. Not immediately afterward, but about a year later. In April of 2009, early 2009, he went to TNA. I think debuted the Lockdown pay-per-view, if I'm not mistaken. And he said the biggest difference between WWE and TNA was that they had more models in WWE at that point in WWE, like for the women and whatever. And TNA was more focused on the wrestling. WWE was more about stars and making stars. TNA was more focused on, I thought he was going to say bringing stars over from WWE, which at that point they weren't yet doing, thankfully. They did have a lot more wrestlers, and they focused a lot more on the wrestling, which was cool. And his whole thing was that he wanted to do MMA and wrestle simultaneously. He started training with American Top Team, Dan Lambert, huge wrestling fan. We saw him on AEW TV recently. He's been involved with TNA before, Impact, whatever. He then signed with Strikeforce. And then Dixie Carter kind of went back on the deal and said, well, we can't have you do both. So he ended up, I guess Hogan and Bischoff were in the room specifically, he had said. When he left TNA, he shook hands, went their separate ways, ended up going back to TNA a few years later, and that was when he got to do both. And they get back to that a little bit later on, after he talks about the MMA work that he did. And he said that he had to get comfortable punching people, because he's not he doesn't want to punch people, and that's just kind of the part of the nature of it. Never really felt that he got punched, or when he did get punched, he would never really feel it until afterward because of that adrenaline. He talks about the difference with fans and wrestling and MMA, and he didn't lose a lot of MMA fights, but he kind of harkens it back to CM Punk, who I believe has shown respect to Lashley in the past. But he had said, when you lose like an MMA fight in Japan, they show you respect and whatever. In the USA or whatever, MMA fans will rip you the fuck apart. I mean, look at Punk. I mean, they completely tore him apart after he lost his 2 matches that he had in the UFC. People completely buried the guy, as opposed to saying, oh, we respect you for giving it all your effort, blah, blah, blah. No, fans in MMA, and even in wrestling too, are fucking vicious. Wrestling fans can completely tear you apart if you don't do well. And he points to no further, no example bigger than CM Punk a few years ago. He actually trained with Cain Velasquez, which I did not know. He talks about that, and he talks about his fight with Chad Griggs, which I wasn't aware of this, but I guess he felt run down beforehand, and even during the fight, I think he ended up losing. And that was what earned Griggs a UFC contract. He found out, Lashley did later on, that he had mono, and that was why he wasn't feeling well. Griggs ended up signing with the UFC, like I said. He actually turned down a rematch with Lashley. Lashley wanted that rematch. He was going to fly him in for it and everything, and Griggs said no. He went back to TNA in 2014, or he wanted to go back to TNA. He asked them to go back, and they said, we just don't have anything for you at this point. He's like, what the fuck? And that really humbled him, and even asked WWE the same thing in probably 2012, 2013. And again, they said, we just don't have anything for you. And he felt really humbled at that point. So TNA ended up getting back to him out of the blue and saying, hey, we got a one-shot for you, Lockdown 2014. Came in, did a one-off appearance attacking EC3. And it was that night where he got a big reaction and people were chanting like Lashley or thank you Dixie or whatever the fuck. And he went back to the curtain and was like, all right, you guys ready to talk now? Ready to give me a contract? So he signed soon after. They put him in a stable with MVP and Kenny King. That was not the Beatdown Clan. That came later. I don't know what this group was called. I remember these days of TNA. TNA's product was complete garbage at certain points in 2014, but they also had a lot of good moments too. And that faction specifically was a big highlight of the show. MVP, the whole point of that group was for King to kind of be like the bumper, so to speak. Bobby would be the muscle, and MVP would win the championship. MVP blew out his knee, so they put the championship on Lashley instead on the Impact after Slammiversary in 2014. He ran down all the opponents that he faced at that point, from Matt Hardy, Jeff Hardy, Kurt Angle. Doesn't say Austin Aries, but he was another one. He worked with Bobby Roode. Oh, man, he worked with a variety of people during that run in TNA, and even in the years that followed, too. But specifically in 2014, he had a lot of great fucking matches. EC3 as well had a lot of great matches with a lot of those guys. And they had really good chemistry to boot, too. Drew McIntyre, he was another one. So he felt no pressure cutting promos in TNA, which is probably why, compared to WWE, at least early on when he first came back a couple of years ago, TNA was a much more laid-back atmosphere, which is why his promos in TNA have almost always been better, because it was way more laid back and he kind of speak more from his heart and not be overly scripted and whatever. WWE is a totally different animal, so that's why his promos in TNA were always better, according to Lashley himself. When he was in TNA, he got very close with the locker room. Bellator told him to not get hurt, because again, he was fighting and wrestling simultaneously. He had a match with Roode a week before a big fight, and Roode had a great match with Roode, but he ended up getting hurt. And he fell to the outside, did something dumb, and he's like, oh, fuck. And I think he was fine. I think he ended up doing the fight anyway. He trains every day for fights, and it was a very hectic schedule, balancing out TNA and Bellator at that point. But he took both jobs very, very seriously. And he never took any time away from either one. He did both, which was really cool. He always wanted to go back to WWE, he says, and he shines a little light on his return to WWE. And I've asked him this myself and talking to him multiple times for interviews, and other people have asked him about it, but he goes into great detail here with a lot of stuff I did not know about his return to WWE. And this is what I love about the Broken Skull sessions, because Steve will ask, not like the hard questions, but questions that people don't ordinarily ask, or the talent will open up more here than they will in media interviews and whatever. So here's the story behind his return to TNA. Like I said, he always wanted to go back to WWE, he said. While he was away, he kept in contact with Triple H and John Laurinaitis. At one point, there was a mass exodus from TNA, talent-wise. Everyone was fucking leaving, which is true. Jeff Hardy, Matt Hardy left in 2017. AJ Styles was already gone by the time Lashley came in 2014. Sting was already gone as well. But even still, EC3 was on his way out in 2018. He left at the exact same time that Bobby did, also to go to WWE. In 2017, who else left? They had just fired, or no, Del Rio got fired a couple of months later, I think. Or maybe it was a year later. No, I'm pretty sure it was in 2018 they fired him. There was a lot of people. The bottom line is they had a lot of people, TNA did, that just up and fucking left in 2016, 2017, 2018. And Lashley said, listen, I know you guys are dealing with some, financial issues right now. I'm one of the highest paid people in the company. My deal isn't up until June. If you can let me go now, free up my deal, let me go talk to Hunter, see if they have anything for me there. If you would let me do that, then we can go our separate ways, and if not, I'll come back. And they said, sure. And they gave him, the blessing. They gave them their blessing to let him go talk with WWE. Talk to Hunter, talk to Triple H, and he said, absolutely, we'd have plans for you. Let's bring you on back after WrestleMania. So Lashley went back to TNA and said, all right, they have plans for me. I would love to go back. And TNA said, okay. And they let him out of his deal early, which I thought was really fucking cool. TNA did not have to do that. For all their faults, and this is a different management, obviously, but I thought that was super cool for them to do. And he also said he's always been a businessman. If WWE said no or they didn't have anything for him, he would have gone back to TNA and said, listen, I'm cool to come back, and he would not have had a bad attitude about it, which is cool. They rewatch his return to WWE on the night after WrestleMania in 2018. They rewatched that back here in that segment with Elias, which was fucking awesome. In retrospect, it wasn't anything amazing for any casual fan, but, I was a big fan of Bobby Lashley. I was a big fan of it, and that pop he got was amazing. And even Steve Austin, it's not a Steve Austin pop, Bobby says, but Steve says, listen, it's a good pop. And they talk about his reaction and how happy he was to be back, and it was such a great fucking moment, and the immediate aftermath was totally botched. They had absolutely no fucking clue what to do with this guy. He talks about how it's a totally different locker room now compared to what it was when he first started, and how he kind of more so stays to himself because he's just kind of a naturally reserved person. And he talks to the people that he already knows, and he's kind of gotten more comfortable now, but back when he first came back, that's what he was doing. And back in the day, most of the locker room after the shows would go out and party and shit. Now, they go out and they just stay home and play video games. That's what he said. And Arn Anderson told him one time that Vince loves Bobby Lashley. He's a big Bobby fan. Steve said, whose idea was it for you to turn heel? Lashley said, it was my idea. I was begging to turn heel, Lashley said. Because he felt like he was a great heel in TNA. He was a heel for his entire time in TNA. And when he was in WWE, when he first came back, he was getting some good reactions early on, but they put him, the company did, and this is his nice way of saying the storylines were fucking terrible, but they put him in a lot of awkward storylines as a babyface. They put him in a storyline with Roman Reigns, which Roman Reigns was also a babyface, who was getting booed, so it helped Lashley to an extent, but he lost that. He lost that feud. The feud with Sammy was fucking awful. The whole sisters thing was terrible. That fucking sucked. He was doing some stuff with Kevin Owens. That was fucking weird, and no one really gave a fuck at that point. He was feuding with like Elias for a little bit, and no one gave a shit. So he really wanted to turn heel. The crowd in the wrestling landscape overall had changed a lot from when the last time he was in WWE. And the person that he was, like as far as like a hard worker, I'm just a no-nonsense guy, that was more of a heel persona in 2018. And he also wanted to be credible and be booked well, so when people eventually beat him, it would mean something. He can help elevate them. People like, he said, Apollo Crews, he worked with for a while, that being last year. He worked with Riddle. And even though these people lose to him, it doesn't hurt them to lose to him because he's credible, which makes sense. They talk about the Hurt Business and how much that helped his confidence, and he really wanted to bring their old selves back, like that no-nonsense, hard-hitting, tough guy from back in the day. That was going to be their persona on WWE TV in 2020. And he wanted other people with himself and MVP. They wanted to put together a stable. Shelton Benjamin was already a good friend of theirs. People thought that Shelton deserved an opportunity. They were going to give him that opportunity. They wanted a young guy. They wanted a young boy in their group, he says. They really wanted Cruz in there. He really wanted Cruz. Alexander was a good fit, too. He was a great fit. They also wanted Ricochet. And they incorporated that into the storyline. They turned a work into a shoe because they really wanted one of these people in the group. Dan Lambert says, or rather, he talked to Dan Lambert about using the American Top Team, using American Top Team's Hurt Business, like name. I guess they used it for something, and they gave him his blessing. Lambert's like, yeah, just get me a shirt or whatever. And he's like, yeah, absolutely, whatever. So, yeah, Heyman loved the idea of Lashley being paired off with MVP, and he was a big MVP fan from when MVP was in the company with Heyman back in 05, 06, whatever. And the big thing that I thought was, this fucking popped me, but Lashley said, hey, when we go pitch it to Vince, do not say that we did this in TNA. Because that's an immediate, like, oh, if TNA did it, we're not going to fucking do it here. He said the quiet part out loud. The WWE, if any other promotion does it, we're not fucking doing it here. I mean, NXT will play off of stuff from other promotions. WWE will fucking not. Why do you think they never put EC3 with Drake Maverick? They did it once in a dark match in 2019. According to Vince, it sucked, and they never did it again. It doesn't matter if you did it in TNA. Vince does not give a fuck. He doesn't want to hear that. So they specifically said when they wanted to go pitch it, do not mention that we did it in TNA, which is just hilarious. But anyway, MVP got him out of that awful Lana angle, which he didn't shit on here, but we all know it was fucking terrible. They were asking him for shirt ideas, WWE was, and he said, what about the Hurt Business? And, you know, it worked, and it wasn't trademarked, shockingly enough. They went after Ricochet, when they went after Cruz. Like I said, they really wanted Cruz. They got Alexander instead, which also worked out. And they kind of led it up to the office. They kind of left it up to them to pick who they wanted, and Alexander was the guy. And it didn't matter, like, oh, it's all black guys, whatever. That didn't really matter to Lashley. It was all a matter of, like, him and MVP already had the history. Shelton Benjamin was a guy that they considered a friend. And Alexander was just in the right place at the right time. It wasn't like a whole Nation of Domination thing. That's why they never really went about it that way, because it wouldn't have made sense, you know? That's not what it was. So anyway, Lashley brings up how he only wins world championships after MVP gets hurt, because he got hurt back in 2014 when he became TNA champion and now WWE champion, also after MVP got hurt earlier this year, which that was hilarious for him to bring up. He also told MVP jokingly, hey, if you ever get hit by a car, I'll be beating Roman Reigns. That's what's going to be happening, which I thought was great. They rewatched his WWE title win from earlier this year, back in the March 1st, 2021 edition of Raw. Praises Miz for being the ultimate, consummate professional, the ultimate heel, whatever. And if you don't like Miz, you're probably jealous of him, he said. And he said that even people that aren't Bobby Lashley fans were okay with him winning the WWE title because they knew he deserved it. And he heard from a lot of people that he had worked with early on, and it brought his old fans back, because people had said, listen, until he's booked properly, I'm not going to be watching what this guy's doing. I just don't give a fuck. And he even said that, not the whole give a fuck thing, but he knew that he had fans out there that just weren't watching the product anymore, because they knew that he was being booked badly, and they came back once he won the championship, which is cool. But like I said, he heard from a lot of people that he used to work with at Booker T, JBL, people in Panama. He had family over there, I guess, which was cool. Didn't sleep for days after he won the WWE Championship, which was really cool. He didn't know if it would ever happen, but it was an amazing moment nonetheless. Talks about love, how he loves being in the ring with Drew McIntyre, who he faced on multiple occasions this year, but specifically at WrestleMania 37. And he felt like Drew needed a real threat. Like, he faced Orton, and Orton took the belt from him, but Drew needed to be put back in chase mode, and Bobby was that guy. He was going to be the guy to put a stop to Drew's dominance, and it worked out perfectly. They had a great dynamic, and that clean win at WrestleMania really cemented him as a main event player. He said that, and I fully believe that as well. By this point, they already taped this after Raw, the Raw after Money in the Bank with fans when Goldberg came back, so they already knew that he was facing Goldberg at SummerSlam, or that was the direction they were going in. He mentions he's always been a fan of Goldberg, and he has a feeling they'll have a good match come SummerSlam, and he also teases, wanting Booker T to come out of retirement to face him, and he wants Steve to come out of retirement to face him, and Steve gets a good laugh out of that. And he says that he was never a big promo guy, so he started to take acting classes to improve that, which is cool. And he feels like he doesn't really go in depth to the whole Lesnar thing, because we've heard that shit to death by this point, and we've heard Bobby talk about it a lot. But he says now would be a good time to have that match with the role that I'm on right now, and I completely agree. SummerSlam would have been perfect, but WWE has other ideas, whatever. He'll step away if he ever feels like he's starting to slip, or someone tells him, hey, you're missing a step here. That's when he'll step away. And he works out all the time. He doesn't eat junk food. He's in amazing shape, obviously. He feels like he has a good 5 years left in his career. And he talks about how when he was growing up, and even before I think he joined WWE, he was like going for a run or something in Germany or something like that. And some kid looked up to him and thought he was a superhero because he looked like one. And he never really thought he would have the impact that he has had on people, in the way that he has in joining professional wrestling. He never thought he would make such an impact on people, which he takes a lot of pride in. And that was what closed out this episode of Broken Skull Sessions. And there was a lot to it, like I said. I've been going on now for, almost well over a half an hour. But I thought this was a great episode. Bobby's a very likable guy. He talked about a lot of stuff that we haven't really heard too much about before. The only topic that kind of glossed over was his departure from WWE as far as why and how it happened. Well, we all kind of know the story. I'm not saying they should have talked about it. I totally get it. Everything else was covered. They talked a lot about TNA, which was really fucking cool. I talked to Bobby about TNA right before he won the WWE title earlier this year when I interviewed him, just because I love that run so much, and I'm glad they're finally incorporating that character into WWE. And not because it was in TNA. Vince likes to make up, I did it myself. And he deserves credit for booking Bobby right finally. But at the same time, they should have been booking him this way fucking 3 years ago when he first came back. But hey, better late than never. But very good episode of Broken Skull Sessions. Check it out right now on Peacock. The Bobby Lashley episode. It's about an hour and a half. It's about 90 minutes. So check it out before SummerSlam weekend this weekend, where we're getting not only one, but two new episodes of WWE 24 on night 1 and night 2 respectively of WrestleMania 37, which is super cool. We haven't got a new 24 in a while. I'm looking forward to those this weekend. I don't know when the reviews will be up. They'll be up at some point when I'm not busy, but keep an eye out for those in the coming week. In addition to tomorrow, an all-new exclusive interview with Goldberg. Just got done talking about him. He'll be here on the channel tomorrow. Article for him going up in Bleacher Report, so check that out. But the audio of the interview is going to appear tomorrow on the channel first thing Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern, talking the Bobby Lashley match, his thoughts on Lashley, training for the match, being back in WWE, and so much more, his son, and a lot more, like I said. So check it out tomorrow here on the channel. Subscribe for more exclusive interviews coming this week. A lot of exclusive content you guys are not going to want to miss. So be sure to like this video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. And hit the bell button to be notified every time a new video goes up. Enjoy SummerSlam week, guys. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.